everybody has something different that they like about God. Some people like the idea that He's distant and they don't have to deal with Him face to face. Some people like the idea that God is personal and real and He's so intimate that they can't imagine living without Him. Some people have a perspective about God that they think He's oh so mean and just so cruel that they wouldn't want to have anything to do with Him. Everyone, whether they ignore Him or not, has an opinion about God. And those that know Him personally usually have a pretty good idea of what He's like. But you know, there are different things about God that people like and don't like. You know, some people like His justice. They like His righteousness. They like the idea of thunderbolts flying out from heaven as though He were Odin. Or sometimes they like the concept of there being a wrath of God. You know, and they deal with the fear of the Lord as the beginning of wisdom. You know, and deal with that kind of relationship that they have with God. Me, I don't like it. I personally would rather fall upon God's mercy than deal with God's wrath. Because you see, that's what I like about God. When Jesus came to reveal Him, everyone knew God as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They knew God as the God who delivered them out of Egypt. They knew God as almighty and holy and righteous and full of wrath and anger and seemingly wanting things that man was completely unable to do for himself. Because, after all, when they saw the scribes and the Pharisees, they said, look at those religious people. If that's what God is like, oh wow, He's some awesome God. I mean, look at the temple that was built with all the gold and the majestic presence that seemed to be there when you walked inside the very midst of it. And then what's interesting is that along comes Jesus. Well, He kind of screwed up the picture. Because you see, Jesus was either a lunatic, a wacko, some kind of prophet, or He was actually God's son, you know, and was coming along saying, guys, I don't know how to tell you this, but that may be your idea of God, but I know who my Father is, and I'll tell you about my Father, and I'll demonstrate for you who my Father is. But your Father, I can't speak for. You know, you don't even know who your Father is, you know, because if that's your idea of God, you have no clue who you're talking about. And so when Jesus came, He didn't make a lot of friends of the religious people in His day because, sadly, they had misrepresented who God was. They had brought about this picture of God being distant and far, not personal and real. God being so removed from the people that you could say that, you know, He had no clue what was going on. And the reality was, Jesus, when He came, said, no, God is in the hearts and the minds of the poor people and the needy, those that would cry out to Him for salvation, those who would fall upon His mercy and His grace. That is where God is. That is where I am. And you don't even know who I am. And so what was interesting is that Jesus brought about the right attitude, but not just attitude about religion, but the right perspective, the right knowledge of God as being the Father, as being our Father. Matter of fact, Jesus went so far as to make it even worse than what most people think. He made it so personal and so real that He said you could even call Him Daddy, Abba, that He would be that personal name that you would have in relationship with Him, because you would become intimate, not just with Jesus, but intimate with the Father, who wants to reveal Himself to you and delights in you more so than even Jesus did, as we see lots of people that are Jesus freaks or Jesus people or whosoever's or whatever it is that you call yourself your name by. We discover that more so than that kind of love is what God has for us, because God is love. And that's the biggest shock I think that the scribes and the Pharisees were hearing at the time. You know, they had no problem with Jesus being a miracle worker. You see, in his day, there are lots of people that were doing miracles. Well, old John the Baptist came along. He didn't do any miracles, but he preached a good story, and people were running to him by the thousands, you know, wanting to get saved, wanting to be baptized, wanting to be cleaned up. Because you see, most people in those days, as well as today, we all know who we are. We all know what we are, and we all know where we're going. Matter of fact, most of us are pretty confident of that. And that's why I like and I choose to talk about God's mercy, because it says His mercy endures forever, and it's always said that His mercy endures forever. And in every situation and circumstance, if you looked closer in the Bible, no matter where you looked, in the Old Testament or New, you would always find it would be His mercy enduring. Because regardless of how you interpret, the fact is God is love, and how He deals with life in general is always based out of love, whether we understand it or not, or whether we comprehend it or not. Me, myself, personally, I can find how God operates in love in every circumstance. Even when He said, go in and wipe those people out, I can see where love is in that. Maybe you can't, but maybe you could talk to God about it. He might surprise you. He might answer. But see, that's what Jesus tried to say. He was trying to bring to us the realization that, look, I'm going to die. That's obvious. I came to die. I came for a purpose so that you could have a personal relationship with God. You could, in your own mind and your own way and your own heart, make a decision to choose to know God in a personal, intimate way, relating to Him as you want to, as He wants you to know Him. But if you neglect so great a salvation that's been presented before you, then you will be condemned by God. He will send you away. He will keep you distant from Himself. But see, Jesus wanted us to understand that, so that that way we could comprehend that there is a personal intimacy. Not just a personal relationship, not just a personal religion, not just a personal ideology of what we think God is, but rather a personal intimacy of knowing and experiencing God in a real and intimate way. That is what Jesus said when He said, and He prayed for His disciples. He said, Father, I know You hear me, but I don't just pray that they may be one. I pray that they may be like You and I are. I pray that they may have that knowledge that You and I have. No one knows You, but I know You, Jesus said. And He said, I want them to have what we have, that personal intimacy, that oneness, that completeness in life and in joy, that completeness in peace, that no circumstances, whether life or death or principalities or powers or spiritual wickedness in high places, would ever be able to separate the person from the knowledge and from the intimacy of God Himself. So it's always interesting to me when people tell me about God, then tell me who God is, or tell me what God said, or tell me how God is relating to them. I always find that really interesting, because the children of Israel tried that once. When they were taken out of Egypt, they had gotten so carried away about their societal absorption, they'd become like the Egyptians. They were more Egyptian than they were children of Israel. And so when Moses came to the mountain where God said, I want you to bring my people to me, that they may worship me. Well, Moses did that. And when he went up the mountain to talk to God about it, the children of Israel showed who they worship. Being impatient and wanting to have their own gods, they created an image of God. They created their own idea of God. They decided to party. And so God said Moses to go down the mountain, because the children of Israel in doing that and creating a false representation of who God is, had made God angry. And God had gone so far as to say, I have seen what they are doing, and I will wipe them out, and I will start over with you. Moses said, You see, if Moses hadn't said something, God would have done it. But Moses revealed a tender heart, a merciful heart, a loving heart. Moses said, don't destroy them, but rather, God, save them. And so God did. God sent Moses down, and some perished that rejected the authority of God and rejected the mercy of God and his loving kindness. And some found salvation. And those that did stood at the mountaintop, or at the base of the mountain, and said, Moses, we want you to tell us what God says, because we are fearful of that kind of God. And so, sadly, they made many mistakes along the way, learning that you don't want someone going for you to God. You want to deal with God personally, one-to-one. And that's what Jesus came to reveal to us, was that there's nothing wrong with being aware that God is great, but there's something wrong when you don't know that God is intimate. There's something wrong when you don't know that God is real. There's something wrong in your understanding if you don't know that God is love. And so Jesus had to come in order to reveal to us the truth of who God is. Without knowing that God is our Father, why would you want to be a Christian? That's the hardest thing in the world to do. You know, it's impossible to love your enemies. It's not even feasible for you to take persecution. It doesn't make any sense at all for someone to slap you on the right cheek and then turn to them the left also. It makes no sense at all to be nonviolent in a violent world. Everybody knows that you have to defend yourself, because after all, who's going to defend you if you don't? God? Well, frankly, yes. Because you see, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, in the time of Daniel, had the same issue. You see, they were living in kind of like an evil world. And it was kind of like everybody was bowing down to worship, the king, Nebuchadnezzar. And those that didn't were being burned alive. They were being cast into a giant cauldron, this place that was going to consume flesh and blood and basically make you into post-toasties. Well, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, said, we can worship, or we can obey what you have to say, Nebuchadnezzar, up to a point, but at that point, we have to serve the living God of our fathers, as opposed to serving you, because whether we live or whether we die, we are his servants, and we must serve him as the God of heaven and earth. And so Neb said, well, sounds good to me. So he tossed him in the fire. And the interesting thing is that when they were tossed in the fire, someone else appeared in the midst of the flames with them. And when they came out of the fire, because they didn't die, they had no smoke damage. They had no realization of being in that fire at all, because the Son of Man, the Son of God, was with them. And fascinating as that was before Jesus was born and before we knew who God was. God demonstrated his mercy and his loving kindness to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego for following him. And that's what God does with us. He wants to reveal things you may not quite understand. He wants to demonstrate how he can stop the circumstances of your life and change them to reveal himself. Anyone can deny that God exists, but how many people can prove that God exists? I can. I've been put into all kinds of life's crises situations, and every time God has been there. Every time God has come through. Every opportunity for God to demonstrate his love, his mercy, and his kindness to me has been done. And it is by his grace that I've been saved. And that amazes me. Because it is of the Lord's mercies that I'm not consumed. Because I'm a sinner just like you. I blow it, and I have had and still do, at times, misconceptions about God, my Father. But you see, I went and turned it around and said, God, you're right, and I'm wrong. I don't understand you. I don't know what this salvation is. I don't know what this gospel is. I don't know what these things are. But if you're willing to accept me, if you're willing to help me, if you are willing to love me like I see you loving all these other people, then I'm willing to give you control of my life. I'm willing to give you all of my life. I'm willing to turn my attention as much as I can, and expecting you to finish the work that you begin in me. I'm willing to give you the opportunity to do what you want with me, as you choose to do, not as I choose. Because I will run away from you at times, God. I will rebel. I will backslide. I will fail. And you know, that's why my understanding of God is so intimate and real, because I fall, fail, and fall back on His mercy enduring forever. Because I know that in me there dwelleth no good thing. I am evil inside, but God keeps changing that inside to make the outside conformable to His picture of what He wants me to be. And because He does that, I'm being saved daily from myself. I'm being saved from the influences of the world. I'm being saved from even the things I eat. You know, people will tell you that there's pesticides and bugs and slugs and you name it. Just how bad your food is. But God says, hey, I made it. I know what I'm doing. You don't. Trust me with all your heart. Lean not in your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge me, and I'll direct your path. And I said to God, do it. And He does. And you see, that's what salvation really is. The personal intimacy of a real and living God, alive and well and dealing with you on a one-to-one basis. That's what your salvation is. That's what your gospel is. That's what you should be falling upon. His mercy. Don't come to God with your righteousness. You'll be condemned. Don't come to God with your religion. You'll be rejected. Don't come to God with any other thing, any other understanding except that God is love. Because God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in Him should not perish. Now, you could perish, even though God so loved the world. You could perish, that God has provided a way of escape, that you be able to bear the times and the seasons we live in, the life that we're going through. You could perish in a lot of ways, but you should not. But you should find everlasting life, because death has no power over those who have fallen on the mercy and grace of God. It is of the Lord's mercies that we are not consumed. They are new every morning. Great is His faithfulness to us, in that He has provided for us grace in time of need. Would you want that kind of God? You see, that's the one I know. I don't know the God of whoever, and the God of Israel, or the God of Abraham, or the God of Isaac, or the God of Jacob. I don't know that God of. I only know Jesus, and I know my Father in heaven. I know He who has dealt with me since I first called upon Him to be saved. I only know my Father, which is the intimate, personal one who deals with me daily on a regular basis, that I have to relate to through Jesus in a way that makes me conformable into His image by what He does inside me, as opposed to what I try to do outside me. That's who I know. And that's the salvation that I've been given. Now, I don't know how you're going to get saved. I don't know where you'll get saved. I don't know why you would neglect so great a salvation that's been given to you by the sacrifice that Jesus has done on the cross. I don't know why you would skip it, and pass it on. I would say try it. You might like it. Because, you see, it's never been about like, oh my God, you're going to get infected with something, and run away and hide. But it's always been about hiding because you know it's real. It's always been about dodging the question because you know it's a fact. It's always been about not really wanting to deal personally with a living God. And so, at some point in time, I hope you make the choice to discover that though it is a personal, intimate God you're dealing with, and He's dealing with you alone, one-to-one, your misconceptions of God probably are keeping you farther away from God than He is to you, because He's standing there with you, even though you can't see Him. He is loving you even though you don't understand Him. He is caring for you even though you have no idea how much He has provided the protection and the direction all around you to cause you to come to Him in a way that's personal, real, and intimate, that only you and He knows. Because you see, no one else will ever be able to take that away from you. No one else will ever be able to say the things you say or do the things you do as you have a personal, intimate, and real relationship with God our Father. It will give you an interesting perspective on life because you will no longer fear death. You'll be looking forward to the eternity that you have to live because you'll no longer think that only what you can see, touch, and feel is all there is to life, because you've already known all along that can't be all there is. And the fact is, it isn't. Eternity is waiting for you. You have but to call upon the Lord and be saved.